So I actually want to start off with a question. I mean, all of us have been interacting with a lot of people today, and I just want to ask you how many people you think, on average, all the participants here interacted with so far today. So how many of you think we interacted with, on average, less than 10 people? All right. Maybe between 10 and 20 people. All right, between 30 and 20 people. Right. More than 30 people. Okay, so we had a few more than 30 people, a few less than 10. Okay. But someone's wrong here. In fact, a lot of us are probably wrong. And that's a problem. Because the way that we traditionally try to learn about how we interact at work, how we collaborate, is I'll ask you, how many people did you talk to? Who did you talk to? And we're just not very good at that. I mean, as we saw from the responses here, there's a nice variance on that. And there's one objective right answer. So what I want to do is try to collect data on what is actually happening and use that to change how we manage ourselves and how we manage our businesses. Now the problem is there's not a lot of companies today that do that. But there is one type of company that uses behavioral data to build their organizations. And as we saw earlier, those are baseball teams. Right? The way you built a baseball team back in the early 1900s and even into 2001 is you had a bunch of old guys who knew a lot about baseball, watched people play baseball, and then based on their subjective evaluations, they build a team. Sometimes they were right, sometimes they were wrong, but that was viewed as the best way to do things. And then you get this guy, Billy Beane, or Brad Pitt, if you like, who says, no, you know what we're going to do? We're going to use data about behavior to build our organization. Of course, again, in the case of baseball, that's fielding, it's hitting, but fundamentally it's data about behavior. And everyone thought he was crazy, but now everybody does it. And the question is, could we do the same sort of thing for business? And I think when we take this data-driven perspective, we can start to understand why things that we do in companies today are just really, really bad. So I'm going to put up a simple question here. Why is organizational change hard? And that might seem sort of silly. Things like mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, they're hard things. But to give you a sense of the magnitude of this problem, globally last year companies spent about $2.3 trillion on acquisitions, and over 60% of those failed. So we destroyed well over $1 trillion in market value last year. I mean, just threw it in the wood chipper. And you can say, well, all right, we're okay with wasting $1 trillion every year. Or you can say, maybe we're focusing on the wrong metrics. I mean, we got a bunch of smart people looking at this stuff. But the stuff that all these smart people are looking at is all this stuff that's over here on the left, right? We're looking at org charts. We're looking at processes, financials. It's easy to look at that stuff. I can point to the person at the top and I can say, that's the most important person at the company. If I ask you who's the social center of your organization, how much does marketing talk to the engineering team? Those are very basic questions that nobody can answer today. But we have the ability to do that. We're actually collecting data all the time on how we're collaborating. And we have these tools with us every day. And they're sensors. You think about that. You have company ID badges. You have cell phones, which are communication tools. They're tools for you to get access to buildings. But they're also sophisticated sensors that we can mine to figure out what's happening. Now, we've created a next-generation ID badge that has microphones to measure how people talk to each other at the millisecond level. We have accelerometers. I can figure out how tired you are. I can see if you're getting engaged by looking at how you lean in. I can do location using Bluetooth data. So all sorts of data that we're collecting and that eventually in 5 years are going to be in every single ID badge. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how, when we apply this to companies, what we can learn about how people work and how we can change what happens in organizations. Now also, last night, what we did is I had a bunch of Googlers together and we had a bunch of the speakers. We had dinner together. And we wanted to look at, well, let's look at how we talk to each other during this little dinner that we had. And so first, we had 12 people wear badges, and one person walked home with them. So I had to corner her today and pick it back up. So we have data from 11 people. But I'll point her out and publicly humiliate her later. But what we saw here is, so first we just saw that we had a bunch of people speak. Actually, we didn't have that much variance in how much people spoke during dinner. We had one person out here who sort of liked to monopolize a conversation, and we had one person out here who just wanted to eat their dinner, and we had some nice stuff in the middle. But also I said, all right, well, how do the Googlers compare to speakers? So Googlers were very gracious hosts, right? I mean, they spoke on average about, I think it was 17% of the time. I was maybe a little bit more talkative, but speakers in general, we like to talk a lot. Maybe that's why they invited us here, to talk. And so, it's something that, this is a little fun graph. It's interesting. I even looked at movement, and I saw that I was very physically active, and we had some other people that I was boring to tears as I was talking to them. So very basic things that we can learn in real time by me pressing a button. But now let's talk about what you could do with that sort of data in real companies. And so what I'm going to talk about is we went to a large retail bank in Europe. And they have hundreds of branches across a continent. And they're managed in exactly the same way. They have the same training, they have the same employee demographics, but they have very different performance. And so we go in there with these badges and we measure how are people collaborating with each other. These people are selling small business loans, and they're paid based on how much they sell. Right? What I'm going to show you here is these are 3 representative branches. We looked at dozens and dozens of these branches. Each dot here is a person, and each line between the dots represents how much these colleagues talk with each other. So you see something interesting. You see in branch 1, pretty much everyone talks to everybody else. Branch 2, you've got these 2 factions that develop. And then in branch 3, you've got these 3 lonely people on the outside here. Maybe they don't shower or something. But the question is, what branch has the highest performance? So we'll do a little vote here. Who thinks branch 1 has the highest performance? Right, branch 2 and branch 3. Okay. Branch 1 did have the highest performance. They sold, on average, about 3 times more loans per employee than in branch 2. Branch 3 was pretty close, but these outliers had really low performance. And in branch 2, I mean, the less said about branch 2, the better. But the question is, why was this happening? Well, in branches like branch 1, even though people were paid on an individual basis, they created a group bonus structure that if they hit a target, everybody got paid. They incentivized people to share. In branch 2, there were dozens of branches that looked exactly like this. Okay. First floor, second floor. Okay. And it takes you, we timed it, it takes you 10 seconds to walk from the first floor to the second floor. But nobody does it, right? I mean, I'm not going to walk up all those stairs. I mean, 10 seconds. But they just don't do it. And even though the rent was cheaper, this company was shooting themselves in the foot by getting a 2-floor location. Because if someone on the first floor learned how to pitch a certain customer, no one on the second floor learned for months. In branch 3, all these outliers, they're new employees that have all been in the company for more than a month, and they still only talk to their manager. And the issue here is these groups get so cohesive that it's really hard to integrate new people. So what this bank did is, first of all, they took what branch 1 did and they rolled it out to the entire company. They start to get rid of 2-floor locations, but also rotate desks in 2-floor locations, so you switch floors every couple months. Then they also give managers some money, and they take new employees out to lunch with somebody else at the company. And you can prove what kind of ROI that has. And we tested this with half of their branches, and with these new procedures, and we actually had their loan sales go up by 11% relative to the branches where we changed nothing. And this is a lot of money, right? This is hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. So this is very interesting. And I think demonstrates the sort of results you can get when you use real data about how people actually work to change how a company operates. I want to step back a little bit and maybe look at a couple of longer, sort of higher level problems that confront workers in general. And one is remote work. And I maybe shouldn't mention Yahoo here. But that other company made a decision to not have their employees work from home. Everyone has to come into work. Okay? And Marissa Mayer got a ton, just bashed in the press. This is not fair to women. It's not fair to flexible workers. But my question is, well, how does this actually affect how we work? And probably a number of us here are programmers in the room. And people assume that programmers are people who sit in the corner drinking Mountain Dew and no one talks to them. I like Mountain Dew, so it's not 100% false. But the fact of the matter is that your code depends on the code of hundreds or thousands of other people. And if you don't talk to those people, if I write code X and you write code Y and I don't talk to you, that's where the bugs pop up. It takes 32% longer to complete code if you don't communicate. What's amazing is in work we did with IBM, we were able to show that people who were remote communicate on average about 8% less about these dependencies, which for a company like Yahoo, and I can get into how we actually mine this data later, But we mine this out of actually digital data. We didn't even look at the badge data. We just look at how people digitally communicate. And if you back up the number, even the most conservative estimate means that Yahoo is saving essentially $150 million a year by bringing everybody together. So imagine they were able to throw up that number and say, this is worth $150 million a year to us. What should we do? That would change the conversation. I'm going to end with one more thing. Gender at work is very interesting to me because we have lots. I don't like using anecdotes to make policy decisions. And you've got people, and I'm going to vastly simplify this, but you've got people like Sheryl Sandberg who say women should just work differently and then everything's going to be good. You've got Anne-Marie Slaughter who says women can't have it all and it doesn't matter what we do. But I just want to look at the data. Do men and women actually work differently, or are we in an environment more like this? Yeah. So maybe a problem. But all right, so we have data from dozens of organizations where we've deployed this technology. And we can ask the simple question. There's well-documented evidence that men and women negotiate differently. But the question is, when it comes down to how we actually work, our behaviors at work, the networks we form, how we talk to customers, how we move around. So here's the question. Do we think there's systematic differences between men and women? And again, we're just looking at the US here, and I'm looking at workplaces where there's between 40 and 60% women. All right, who thinks there's differences? Differences. Wrong. Nope. No differences. But wait. Okay. Well, we know there's, that men and women are promoted at different rates. Maybe it's just the behaviors that predict promotions. Right? That could be it. So it turns out we can predict promotions very accurately by looking at changes in behavior. All right. Let's try this again. Who thinks there's differences between men and women in just the combination of these behaviors? A couple. And wrong again. No. So, all right. There's one thing that women can do that men can't do, and that's get pregnant. Okay? And we don't have enough data on people who've taken maternity leave, although actually there's a great study out of Stanford, and sitting right there in the front, where you actually, and I could talk about this, but basically where essentially they created fake resumes and had people rate candidates on how desirable they were. And it turns out that the most desirable candidates were men with kids, and the least desirable candidates were women with kids. So men like me who have kids get a bump, and women who have kids don't get a bump. And unfortunately what this means, when you look at all the data, is that the differences between men and women in the workplace come down to bias. And that sucks. Because bias is hard to change. This is something that no matter how many leadership courses we create, this is going to take decades to change. This is going to need to involve the language that we use. It's going to need to involve the role models that we have, the people who are on TV. And that's something that requires societal commitment. And so I challenge us all to try to figure out how we can affect this at the societal level and not just think about implementing a single program, but thinking about how we talk about this in general and in society. And I'm way over my time, so I'll finish with a plug for my book, and thank you very much.